before sunrise on a mild summer morning in June 1995. A 27-year-old television news anchor named Jodi Huisentruit hurriedly left her apartment in Mason City, Iowa, headed for work. But she never arrived, and her disappearance has never been solved. In 2003, two television news reporters created FindJodi.com, a website dedicated to preserving Jodi's memory and keeping her case alive. This is the official Find Jodi podcast. Welcome back to the Find Jodi podcast. I'm Scott Fuller. In August of 1993, just under 2 years before Jodi Huisentruit was abducted from outside of her apartment in Mason City, Iowa, another woman vanished in a different time zone. 33-year-old Nancy Manny sailed around the world working on commercial ships out of Maryland. She was one of the very few female members of what is now known as the Seafarers International Union. She was found dead in August of 1993 floating in the Chesapeake Bay, and her cause of death was ruled as a drowning, but the manner of death was not determined. Authorities didn't know if Nancy was murdered or died in some other way. As police investigated, they discovered some very disturbing poetry writings of Nancy's boyfriend, including a poem titled Night Stalker that seemed to allude to a victim floating in the ocean and being consumed by predators. In the months prior, perhaps similar to the Jodi Huisentruit case, Nancy's friends came forward to reveal that Nancy had been receiving threatening communications prior to her death. That case remained unsolved until 1997, 4 years later, when a man living in Florida, 32-year-old John David O'Mara, was charged with Nancy's murder. He had been already incarcerated in Florida on a domestic violence charge when an airing of Nancy's case on Unsolved Mysteries led to a tip that cracked the case for police. John O'Mara was in Maryland in 1993 to kill Nancy Manny. He was in Florida when he was arrested for domestic violence and then charged with Nancy Manny's death in 1997. Jodi Huisentruit disappeared right in the middle in 1995. If you reference a copy of the Mason City phone book from the year or so that Jodi lived in the Key Apartments in Mason City, you'll see that one of Jodi's downstairs neighbors in Building C was John O'Mara, or a man named John O'Mara. There was, of course, more than one. Even so, worth looking into. John David O'Mara, the murderer of Nancy Manny, had no apparent ties to his victim in Maryland. He had no connection to the school she was attending. He had no connection to the shipping industry. Few, if any, of Nancy's friends knew about John O'Mara, which is one of the reasons that police in Maryland never had him on their radar for Nancy's case. It turned out that Nancy and John had gone on one date on John's boat, which is when he killed her. Was it possible that the murderous John O'Mara was the same John O'Mara who lived not only in the same building as Jodi Huisentruit in 1995 when she disappeared, but also in the downstairs apartment unit of Building C, likely the unit closest to the van that Randy Linderman told Mason City Police he saw on that morning of Jodi's disappearance? A few years ago, I found John O'Mara. My conversation with him is coming up next.
I was in Key Apartments for about 4 years when I lived in Mason City. And during the last couple of years I was there, I moved from one apartment in Key over to that one. So I was directly under Jodi's apartment at that time. I think she moved in maybe a year and a half before she disappeared. I can't remember. But I know that because we both lived in the C apartment, I would see her car, so we parked around the same area. But I'm thinking it was a year and a half, if I remember right, that I lived in that. But as far as how long I lived in 103, probably a couple of years, if I remember right, before I moved out. Yeah.
But you said earlier in an email you were not there at the time, though, right, that day?
Right, yeah. So I was in the process. I accepted a position here at Mayo. I worked as a pharmacist in Mason City, and I was in the process of moving. So the morning she disappeared, I had left the night before. I stayed with some friends in the Twin Cities to take the pharmacy law exam, the Minnesota pharmacy law exam, the next morning. So the morning she disappeared, I was taking a pharmacy law exam. And, you know, like everybody else, when I was driving home, I heard the news that she had been abducted. I was kind of in shock as everybody else was. But, yeah, so I was not there that morning. When I came back, the car was still there. They had sort of, the police had marked kind of where things had dropped by her car, like her keys and you know, hair dryer, I believe, those types of things. So yeah, so I was not there. I probably would have heard something, I'm thinking, if I was, because it happened kind of right out in front of where my balcony was, you know. But, no, I wasn't there. The FBI interviewed people in, I'm not sure how many people they interviewed. They did interview me and I told them, you know, they were asking about, you know, did you see any, you know, people there that you didn't recognize, or people that had, you know, sort of said, hey, Jodi Huisentruit lives here, like they were sort of maybe obsessed with her, things like that. I didn't notice anybody different there. I didn't notice anything peculiar prior to it happening. So I wasn't able to help very much. And I rarely saw Jodi, honestly, other than like an occasional greeting in the parking lot, you know, because we parked fairly close. I just rarely saw her. I think she was kind of a socialite. I think she was out and about. But it could have been the work schedules too, because she worked really early in the morning, and I had a kind of a typical work schedule. I would, you know, kind of day shifts most of the time, but I just don't remember seeing her very much. And I just don't remember seeing anything peculiar or different prior to it happening.
Did you ever see her with anybody at the complex?
No, I really didn't. No. The times I did see her, she was by herself. So I never saw her with anybody.
It's kind of a long shot. You've answered a lot of my other questions already, but do you remember seeing anything unusual in that dumpster area in the days before? Remember where the dumpster was? Was it, I'm trying to do my directions, was it sort of the west side? It would be on your immediate left as you exit the building.
Oh, okay. I don't recall anything different about it, you know, around that time. I don't.
You probably would have heard something, though. I agree with you, because as far as everyone thinks the location where it happened is, that would have been right out your patio.
Exactly, yeah. Like you say, if I was there, I probably would have heard something, because people say they heard, you know, like a scream, kind of, and so I probably would have heard it. I didn't run a fan at night or anything, and but no, I wasn't there. So
what was it like to live there, just in general, with the people and noise complaints or anything like that?
I think people kind of kept to themselves mostly. It wasn't the most secure place, because, you know, you you go into the complex. A lot of complexes, you have to sort of buzz in to get in. They didn't have any security system at that time, so like anybody could walk in and be right outside your door within the complex. Maybe it's secure now, but it wasn't at the time. So I guess that's what I remember about it. I always felt like I needed to remember to lock my door, because like anybody could wander up and down the hall, otherwise, I think there was a fairly high turnover of people there, but I don't remember. I think, like you say, I think people kind of kept to themselves. That's about all I remember about it.
You said you were interviewed by the FBI. Were you interviewed by the Mason City Police that you remember?
No, just FBI.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's pretty much it.
All right, John, I appreciate the time. You got my heart going a little bit, because it turns out a different John O'Mara, obviously a different one, killed somebody in a different state and kind of had a window of opportunity, and I thought I was onto something there until I found you.
Oh, jeez. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, yeah. I wish I could have been more help at the time. That's just the sad thing for me is I wish I could have been there and maybe helped, but I hope...
had you been home, you could look out the window and you probably would have seen something or heard something. Yeah.
I would have jumped up and probably saw something or heard something. I hope you can uncover something that can give some peace and to the family.
The real John O'Mara, or John David O'Mara, the murderer, died in prison shortly after that interview with Jodi's neighbor of the same name in 2019. There will be at some point an entire episode of these close calls. The FindJodi team has chased leads down rabbit holes over the years in this case that some of you may not even be familiar with, and some of those leads can be shared on the podcast here. But some of the leads, strange as they might be, haven't yet been fully explored. And there are many. For example, one of the men we've been told attended the Chamber of Commerce golf outing with Jodi the day before she disappeared was arrested for window peeping in Mason City 2 years later, before leaving the state. And then 6 weeks after Jodi's abduction, 2 Mason City men abducted a woman outside of a bar in August of '95. Mark Hoffman was 34 at the time and Kenneth Sharp was 28. Police say the 2 men abducted an unnamed victim late Thursday night into a Friday morning. They let the woman go eventually, and she called police. Sharp was arrested later the same day. Hoffman was picked up by police the next day. It wasn't until very recently, though, we learned through public documents that Kenneth Sharp had also been arrested on June 23rd, or 4 days prior to Jodi Huisentruit's abduction. Although for that arrest, in the records, there's no indication of what Sharp would have been charged with, or the agency that arrested him, or how long he stayed in jail. In relation to the abduction charge from August of '95, the 2 men later turned on one another. Hoffman was eventually released with a lighter sentence, and Kenneth Sharp remains incarcerated today. FindJodi continues to pour through whatever records are available in search of that one name that we've already seen before, or a name we haven't, that might eventually lead to answers of what happened to Jodi on June 27, 1995, 26 years ago this month. Thank you for listening to the FindJodi podcast. We have several episodes planned for the summer that we feel you'll be eager to hear in relation to Jodi's case, including scheduled interviews with people who have first-person accounts to share of what happened in relation to Jodi's case that morning. As the benchmark of 26 years approaches later this month, we'll also be conducting a team roundtable here in the podcast and likely put together another Q&A episode as well. We've been collecting questions and comments from you, and please feel free and use the contact form on the website to add any others for those upcoming episodes this summer at FindJodi.com. Anyone with information about Jodi's case can reach out to Mason City Police at 641-421-3636. Information can also be provided to the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigations at 515-725-6010 or by email dci.info@dps.state.ia.us. And tips can also be submitted anonymously if necessary to FindJodi.com. Find Jodi is a nonprofit. All donations and revenues are used in our efforts to keep Jodi's case active and in the public. For the entire Find Jodi team, I'm Scott Fuller. Thank you for listening.